Today, several crucial decisions for Ukraine were made in the United States of America, which emphasize that Donald Trump's team is sharply changing its direction in support of Ukraine. The United States Congress voted to continue military aid to Ukraine, and even the radical Republicans from the Make America Great Again movement could not prevent it. In addition, the head of the Pentagon, Pechiy, who has not always been on Ukraine's side, suddenly convenes the defense ministers of NATO countries to discuss coordinating arms supplies for the armed forces of Ukraine. It also became known that the United States has already made a number of deals with Europeans for supplying weapons to Ukraine. And the Europeans are buying offensive weapons from the United States specifically for the armed forces of Ukraine. And most importantly, the United States is completely revising its contracts for supplying Patriot systems and more, and is redirecting them to supply Ukraine. And that's not all. My name is Pechiy. Today is July 19th. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. Now let's go through everything step by step. So, today extremely important news came from the United States for Ukraine, and all of it concerns military aid and the transfer of weapons to the armed forces of Ukraine. Let's start with the United States Congress. The United States House of Representatives, by an overwhelming majority, did not allow the blocking and thus further supported the continuation of military aid to Ukraine. This was officially announced by Congressman Don Bacon, a Republican. The corresponding decision was supported in the United States House of Representatives by the votes of 353 congressmen, while 76 opposed it. And next, a quote from Bacon. This morning, the House of Representatives, by an overwhelming majority, voted in favor of continuing military support for Ukraine. 353 in favor, 76 against. And here it's important to note one thing. The corresponding bill to stop military aid to Ukraine was introduced by a Republican from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene. The same one who claimed that Russian speakers are being killed in Ukraine, that priests of the Orthodox Church are being killed, and all the other nonsense. Amendment number 116 provided for a ban on using any funds to assist Ukraine. In other words, Taylor Greene proposed to exclude aid to Ukraine from the defense spending bill for the year 2026. Interestingly, in addition to all the Democrats, 2/3 of the Republicans also voted to continue aid to Ukraine. The amendment failed by a vote, as I already mentioned, of 76 to 353. All the Democrats voted against, 1/3 of the Republicans voted for, and 2/3 also voted against. Let me remind you that Marjorie Taylor Greene tries to push through anti-Ukrainian amendments every time, and every time she fails. Back in April 2024, Taylor Greene tried to cancel aid to Ukraine in the supplemental budget of $61 billion. At that time, her amendment failed with 71 in favor and 351 against. This fact shows that there is still overwhelming bipartisan support for Ukraine in Congress. And it's important that the United States defense budget for 2026 still includes a provision for military aid to Ukraine from Pentagon reserves and the sharing of intelligence data. United States Secretary of Defense Pechiy opposed this at the beginning of the year. And now let's move on to him, since he has drastically changed his views. Well, or maybe Donald Trump made him do it. So, it was officially announced the other day that the Trump administration refused to deliver already ordered Patriot batteries to Switzerland and allowed Germany to buy them instead, and Germany in turn promises to transfer them to Ukraine. Although that's not exactly how it is. The arrangement is as follows. Germany gives Ukraine its 2 existing Patriot batteries, and next year it will receive 2 brand new systems from the Americans, which were originally intended for Switzerland. The Swiss were asked to wait longer since the priorities have changed. As Segunia writes, and I quote, "The United States promise to quickly replace the German Patriots is the first case where the Pentagon is facilitating arms deliveries to Ukraine since President Trump stated earlier this month that he supports sending more weapons to Ukraine. However, this move also highlighted the difficulties in supplying Patriot systems and other weapons to Kyiv. Since Western defense production lines are struggling to meet Ukraine's requests for help in protecting its cities and frontline troops from increasing Russian missile and drone attacks. Attempts to speed up Patriot deliveries to Ukraine by supplying Germany with systems from the American production line are in line with Trump's promise to make NATO allies pay the United States as part of supplying additional weapons to Ukraine. And most interestingly, this Trump deal is similar to a step taken by Joe Biden's administration in 2024, which put Ukraine at the front of the line to receive air defense interceptors directly from the United States. According to a senior American official, as more countries agree to supply complexes to Ukraine from their own arsenals. The Trump administration will continue to adjust planned future deliveries, giving priority to these allies. And here, Pete Hegseth's team has already stated that new agreements will be signed between the United States and its allies within the next week to release additional weapons for Ukraine. United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth will hold a virtual meeting with other NATO defense leaders on Monday to discuss aid to Kyiv. After that, a separate meeting will be held on Wednesday with the participation of countries that possess Patriot systems, led by General Alexis Grinkovich. He is the Supreme Commander of NATO's General Staff in Europe and the head of the European Command. So, as you understand, there are two episodes here. First, the defense ministers gather and decide on the political part of the issue. Then, a day later, the military generals meet and apparently discuss more practical matters from a military perspective. It's also important that the Swiss responded to this situation with understanding. The Swiss government stated that the United States decided to change the priorities for the delivery of Patriot surface-to-air missile systems. As part of United States' efforts to increase support for Ukraine, Switzerland purchased 5 Patriot systems which were supposed to be delivered between 2026 and 2028. But Switzerland agreed that Ukraine is a higher priority right now and they are willing to wait. Well, that's next week. Pete Hegseth's task will also be to make as many individual agreements as possible with NATO member countries to purchase weapons for Ukraine. The Pentagon will reportedly oversee all these efforts. And these deals will go beyond Patriots and will include both offensive and defensive weapons that NATO countries will supply to Kyiv and then purchase the same kind to replace them. From the United States, Germany, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Finland have already publicly announced their support for this initiative. According to several high-ranking European officials, other European countries plan to join in providing assistance to Kyiv under this scheme once the details of the initial plan are agreed upon. It is also important to note that on Monday, Pete Hegseth already hosted German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius at the Pentagon this week, in particular to discuss the Patriot deal. Trump stated that this is already a settled matter. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that Ukraine will also receive long-range missiles in the very near future in connection with Trump's new initiative. In addition, the same General Grinkovich, whom we have already mentioned, publicly stated that he received an order from the United States President to organize all logistics as quickly as possible for the rapid delivery of any weapons requested by Ukraine and agreed to be purchased by the Europeans. Right now, the Europeans are waiting for clarification from Washington regarding the types of ammunition and weapons that will be supplied to Ukraine, the delivery schedule, and whether the United States or other countries will impose restrictions on which targets in Russia Western-made ammunition can be used against. These are exactly the questions that Pete Hegseth and his NATO colleagues are supposed to discuss and resolve next week. And here, there is one very interesting and telling point. The Australian authorities announced today that Ukraine has received the main batch of 49 Australian M1A1 Abrams tanks, which were promised to Ukraine back in October, the year 2024. But do you know why there was such a long pause in the deliveries? Because in April of this year, it became known that they were being delayed due to objections from the Trump administration. Trump then asked Australia not to rush and later even completely banned the transfer of American tanks to Ukraine. But now the delivery of the tanks that have already been transferred means that the United States' objections have been lifted. In other words, the Americans have given the green light for the supply of American tanks. Abrams. And this is an important signal for Hexet to discuss with his NATO colleagues next week. Well, you know, it's funny, but the press secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Mashka Zakharova, is already threatening European countries with strikes. And just at the end of this episode, I'll quote Mashka Zakharova without any comments. Moscow considers itself entitled to attack military targets in countries that allow Kyiv to strike deep into Russia with their weapons. In the event of further escalation of the conflict, we will respond decisively and with equivalent force. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this channel, I would appreciate it. You can do this financially by donating on any of the platforms listed in the description of this video or by becoming a sponsor here on the platform. Or you can scan the QR code, where you can also leave your donation. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. Subtitles created by